Hey there, I'm Adam, and I'm going to do a view tutorial with you guys right now. Um, we're going to be using Vue 10.5 Extreme. It's kind of the latest version. So um, if you're someone who's a previous user of Vue, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those features there, some of the stuff that's changed. But the primary focus of this tutorial is going to be the terrain fractal generator. And the terrain fractal generator is something that I haven't seen a lot of tutorials kind of out there really covering. I had to kind of poke around and play with some of the features to really get my brain wrapped around what it was doing. So this is based on some of my observations as well as poking through the reference which is in the help there. So um, let's get into this. First thing that I'm going to do here is uh, let you know that I went into the options myself and loaded the Maya 2011 settings. That's not really going to impact a lot of what's going on other than just kind of the view and the way that I'm using my hotkeys. So since I'm not really going to be talking about any of that, if you looked at it and saw the interface was this darker gray color and you're like, oh my god, it's a different, I don't know what's going on, don't worry about it. It's just because I'm just using that preset which changed the colors of the interface. So anyways, if we look along the left-hand side here, we've got our procedural terrain generator right here. So I'm just going to left-click on it to create sort of default. If I were to right-click on it, it would have created a one from preset. And I'm just going to sort of navigate here. So if we take a look here, we can just see what I'm getting from that, which is inside. Looking up the mountain. So there you go. There's our mountain. So it's just a quick terrain that it will create for you. There we are. Now, this terrain, when we first create it, has an overall scale that's going to be assigned to it. So if we go in here and take a look, we've got height and set of values here. So this is just position information where it was placed. X, Y are your left and right, forward and back kind of things based on looking down at the plane. And then the Z value, of course, is the kind of up and down value inside of here, which is a bit different if you're using Maya or Soft. Softimage and Maya both use Y up rather than Z up. So this is more along the lines of, say, 3 Studio Max, or to be honest, original kind of coordinate system of maps. Your maps 2D were X and Y, and then Z would have been sort of a depth value. So that's essentially where this is coming from. But if we go down here, we've got rotation, and then we've got scale. And scale will give us a different kind of value each time. Right now I've got a 273, so I'll just go, let's say just 250, and I'll work with that. If I were to go ahead and say like a value of 1, you'll notice that the train just got completely flat. So I'm going to go with 250. And the reason why I'm doing that is that if you're following along with me and you want to have exactly the same kind of results, you're going to have to start off with the same kind of scale as me. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the terrain and do some modifications. So if you haven't used Vue before, it's simply done by going ahead and double clicking on where it says procedural terrain. Don't click on the icon. The icon is just a show and hide feature. It's kind of like in Photoshop, the little eyeball that you get turns it on and off. I want to double click on the name, and that's going to bring me into this editor. So the terrain editor is great. You got your sculpting features that you can go ahead and sculpt and paint and do all sorts of wonderful stuff, but I'm just going to quickly reset that so that there's nothing there. I'm also going to turn off another feature, which is basically zeroing out the edges here. I want to see the whole overall fractal. I don't want to see it impacted by this setting, which is great for doing, you know, a hill or a mountain or something like that. That's kind of like a one-off. But I really want to see the fractal and really understand what's going on here. So let's go ahead and turn that off, and that's going to give us all the way to the edges. The other advantage of this, ultimately, of course, is that if you're using something like this and you got a lot of hills and valleys and smaller sort of mountain ranges, you can kind of poke your camera down in the middle there, look out on the vista, and it'll look like there's more mountains off into the distance. So it's a good feature to kind of turn off. The next thing is, since I said we're going to be talking about the node and not really about this terrain editor, we have to go to the Procedural tab. So the Procedural, and we can see this sort of shader ball information. It's showing the fractal that's showing up here. So I'm just going to hold down my Control key, and I'm going to left mouse, or use the tip of your tablet pen if you're using a tablet. I'm just going to pull this off to the side so that I can have them both on the screen. I can see what's going on over here as I adjust things over here. So as I said, if you've been using previous versions of Vue, say version 8 or so, which is what I've been playing with, this is going to be a little bit new to you. This little node right here, the multiplier, it's essentially changed how you work in here. If you import a scene from a previous version of Vue, it's going to give you a multiplier with a different value. The default value is 128, but so let's say you've taken something from Vue 7.5 or 8 or whatever, and you bring it in, you're going to get a different value based on some of the things that you've done. So there's something going on behind the scenes in those previous versions that we don't see here. It's kind of been exposed, and we have that feature to play with. Now, this multiply by, essentially what it's doing is it's affecting things like our metascale, our largest feature, our gain. All of these features here are being multiplied against this kind of seed value. So if you were to remove this, just delete it thinking, okay, well, I'll react the way that I'm used to, that's not what's going to happen. If you delete this, you're going to find that you're going to be heavily impacted. You're going to find that the metascale, the changes are going to be extremely broad suddenly, that you're going to have to work with much larger values of gain, and that your largest feature is something that's going to have to be much smaller. In order to play with it, you're going to be dealing with maybe even decimal places in order to get that to function how you expect it to. So be aware that this multiply by is kind of an important aspect of everything that you do. So something to kind of look at. The next thing is, I was talking before about changing that overall scale so that we were the same. It looks like it didn't take, so I'm just going to make sure 250 meters. I'll just double click that again, and I'll go back into here. I noticed when I changed that it also affected this. That could have been what altered it. And then if we go into here and take a look at this, we've also got offsets. So this vector 3 seed node, that's what it says, vector 3 seed. If I just kind of zoom in a little bit there, I don't know how well it's going to be visible on the video. But this vector 3 seed contains information of x, y, and z coordinates. Now, why would I get x, y, and z coordinates? Is there anything about the placement of the mountain or anything? Not exactly. It's about sort of a preview slice of a three-dimensional fractal. So we're dealing with a fractal here. If you've used any kind of fractals before, you know what it is. If you used, say, Photoshop, render clouds would be an example of a fractal. And this fractal is essentially a set of mathematical values that can create a three-dimensional sort of volume. And the only way they could really kind of describe that volume is, say, something like a big block of Swiss cheese. So what we're doing here is we're giving x, y, z coordinates for a specific slice of that cheese. So if I were to tell you to go ahead and give me a slice of this cheese, you automatically go ahead and just slice off just a carving over here. But let's say I want a specific slice of that cheese. I'm really picky and I really want a specific piece. Well, I go in here and I say, well, I want, you know, change my values here. I want this slice. There we go. Right there. I'm going to just take that top piece there. Well, it would be a coordinate system that gave me z up, y, x values to kind of pick where that slice is. And if I instead actually wanted that slice, but I wanted it from somewhere, say right here, so if I took from this quadrant and go down to the middle and cut up my little slice in there, well, then I'd get my little slice of cheese, and that would be that little cross section, whatever it is, maybe a little circle here and here and here, maybe there's a little one there, and I'm picking out that internal slice. So that's what the coordinate system is. It's going in and picking from that three-dimensional fractal, this big block, and picking out a specific slice, a two-dimensional slice of that information. To help us visualize this, I've created a quick little scene in Maya, which just is a plane. And we can kind of see it. Created a simplified sort of fractal just to represent that. We can see that we've got x and sort of what would be y values. It's z in this particular case, but that's because we're inside of Maya. But it would be x and y values would give you this. And then the z value would be essentially going through the depth. So it's kind of like an MRI. And if I grab this and I kind of drag through, you notice the shapes start to change. It's, if you look at this little circle in here, it's like I'm reaching a pocket of air on one of those bubbles, and it kind of fills in there. So we're getting those different slices through that depth, picking through that overall volume. So as I move this volume around, we're seeing a preview, a different preview of that internal of the fractal, while being able to also go kind of left and right and pick that portion. And what this fractal is, being black and white, is essentially where black is, it remains where it is. And as it gets brighter and brighter, it pushes further and further upwards. So white would be pushing to the very top height, and black would be the very base level. So we see this fractal, and that's what the fractal is doing here. It's modifying this terrain so that 2D slice then creates a three-dimensional object based on those values presented. So if I wanted exactly the same slice, let's just say 700, 700, and 700, I've got that slice. If I click over here, it's just going to update. Wait a second there. So I've updated it, and that's that slice. So if you've used the 250 value there, you've got the same multiplier, which you should if you've just created a brand new scene, 128, and you use that 700, 700 by 700, everything that I do in here should look exactly the same on your monitor if you're using the same version. And that's the idea here, is that we need to kind of pull from a standardized internal piece, because if I take this file and I load it up on another computer, I want the same mountain. I don't want a different mountain. I want the same mountain. If I tell you, hey, look at this, these settings that I've created right here, they're fantastic, it makes this beautiful mountain. Well, you want to be able to go ahead and fill in those values and get exactly the same mountain that I did. So that's what we need to do in order to ensure that we need to deal with the overall scale of the object that we're applying it to, what its kind of maximum depth is. We need to deal with the vector values, so the specific same portion of that piece of Swiss cheese there. And we need our multiplier to be the same thing, so that all the values are multiplied against the same values. So that will get us to something that will allow us to see the same sort of thing. So if you've got all those figured out, then you should be along the same lines as me. The next thing that we have to think about is this surface. We'll just switch to wireframe here and turn off the gloss. If I go in there, you can see that it's got a resolution. It's made out of tiny little triangles, all those tiny little triangles. And this affects our overall view of this. So let's just turn that off so I get back to a shaded view of this. We have a divide, which will break it down into lower resolution, and we have a multiplier, which will subdivide it into more tiny little pieces. So if I do that, you're going to see that I'm going to get finer details, a lot more finer details within there, and that's what I want in order to start playing with some of what I'm going to be seeing in here. So I'm just going to do it once for now. I may add another value in there in order to get some more detail, but we'll do that at a later point. So remember, at least one of those to kind of get a better view of what we're dealing with. So let's deal with the node itself. So the node, and get it to the terrain fractal, we just simply have to change the fractal type. So we just go down. We've got terrain fractal and terrain fractal version 2. I'm not going to poke into terrain fractal version 2 right now, but I will go into the terrain fractal, and this is going to give me a different set of values in here. Now we've got a whole bunch of stuff in here, and just like this vector seed, we also have an origin, and the origin is going to do pretty much the same thing. If I go ahead and change this origin, let's go change the X, and just look in here as I update this. I'm just going to double click. Oops, wasn't paying attention. I hadn't updated it after I turned this fractal on. And when I turn this on, this is essentially what you're going to get. Let me just turn down some of these values so we can see this a little bit better. I'm just going to set most of this to 0, and you'll see why I do that. So just quick double click, and this is essentially what it's creating. It's creating kind of like sand dunes, essentially is the end result. And as I said, I'm going to go ahead and alter this. I'll just change that back to 0. And if I double click, you'll see the terrain shifts. So the preview edges remain the same, but the terrain itself shifted. And if I were to go ahead and change the Z value again, and let's do something like a value of 1, you notice that some of these have got smaller and some of them got bigger. And it's like those pockets of Swiss cheese. If you just happen to be getting the starting slice of one of those holes, if you slice down a little bit further, it would get larger. If you're getting towards the end of one of those holes in the Swiss cheese, the hole would get smaller. So it's essentially what we've got going on here. So you can just leave those guys at 0 as well. The next thing that we have is the Metascale. And the Metascale, again, if you get rid of this guy, you're going to see big overall changes. But the Metascale, as it's described by the reference manual here, is that this is the scale of the global variations of the noise. And it says if you take a fractal that represents a mountain, the largest feature scale would be the size of the mountains. So essentially, what we've got here is something that says you're in a helicopter and you're kind of looking down at the overall mountain range. So let's just bring this down to, I don't know, 30, and you're not going to see a major change. You did see some of it bump up and down, but not a whole lot, right? So let's bring this down to 10. And now these guys have, the smaller features have become much more intense. They're still kind of in the same place, but they become way more intense. And it's kind of like an overall, not necessarily zooming in on the little details, but an overall scale of the world, how big something is in the world. So something being the size of a grape versus, say, the size of a watermelon versus the size of a minivan. That's essentially what that global scale is doing for us. So I'm just going to bring that back up to 40. And let's get into the largest feature. So the largest feature is kind of like a zoom lens. If I take that largest feature and I bring it up, it's going to actually zoom in on one of these proportions, making them much larger. So if I brought that up to, let's say, 20, and go in there, you can see these features have gotten much bigger. It's essentially me zooming in on them. Let's go up to 30, and it's pushing in. So these features have gotten bigger. Then we have smallest feature. And smallest feature I could go ahead and change to my heart's content, and you're not going to see anything happen right now. And that's because it actually is kind of dependent on this whole roughness aspect. The roughness is all the sub-details, little details, the noise that kind of goes in between all these big ridges. So if these big ridges were your mountains, all the cracks and crevices and little stones and stuff like that would be your roughness. That's what would define those aspects there. Now, as I increase this, I'm getting more and more information. It's delving deeper and deeper into that information, more and more little details. Let's increase it a bit more, make it even more rough. And I'm going to zoom in a little bit. And as I said, I'm going to update that a little bit more so I get a bit more detail down in there so I can see a little bit more. So by increasing the resolution, I can see finer details. And this smallest feature basically determines how small these various little cracks and crevices can be. Now, this is not going to change anything but the number of iterations that it goes down to finer and finer detail. The larger the value that I have, the less iterations it will do. So the less of the smaller features that will exist. So let's say I have a big crack, a medium-sized crack, and a very tiny crack in a rock. And I turn that feature up. What's going to happen is the smallest cracks are going to disappear, but it's not going to change the size or shape of the other cracks. They're going to remain where they are. They're just going to be the only ones present. The smaller cracks will disappear. So let's take this smallest feature up and just see what happens. So I click to update that. You notice all this other information has remained where it was, but the tiny little bits of noise has gone away. So this roughness is all that detail that's in there, but it doesn't have any fine detail. So the smallest feature is that right there. So if I take this smallest feature and bring it back down, it means that I can have tiny, minuscule little details, adding in more overall noise. So that's essentially what the smallest feature does. So that's our roughness and our smallest feature. So if I drop that roughness down, it's the maximum number of possible iterations, and this is how many iterations downwards it will go. So there we go. We got that in there. The next thing that we have is the gain. And the gain, what you're going to notice is it impacts the larger features. So if I go ahead and take this gain and I increase it, let's say to a value of 3, pay attention to the larger shapes as well as the smaller shapes. Let's go update that. The larger shapes got much larger, but the smaller shapes essentially stayed the same size. So this roughness stuff, these smaller features, haven't really changed. What's really changed is the bigger features. So the gain is about the bigger features. So the gain will give you sort of a larger overall hills and sort of deeper valleys, but the little features will remain the same rough size that they are currently. So the next thing that I'm going to play with here, I'm actually going to turn off the roughness so we can take a look. So just get back to that, and I'm actually going to go ahead and zoom out a little bit just so we can see more of what's going on. And I'm going to skip over these guys for a moment. I'll come back to them, but I'm going to skip over them just to go to the type of landscape. So we've got ridges in here. We switch down to plain noise. Just click on that. You can see what happens. It's just kind of inwards and outwards kind of things, kind of like the Perlin noise, simple noise fractal that was already there, but with added features, obviously. So that's there. And then we have billows, which go and take a look at, and we see this kind of feature here. What's interesting to note at this particular moment in time is to look at the difference between billows and ridges. Now if you notice there, maybe focus on one specific location. I'm just going to switch again. Pay attention to this specific location right there. You notice that the ridges have gone down and the valleys have come back up. It's basically kind of an inversion of the fractal, an inversion of the values, so that the ridges have gone downwards and the valleys have come upwards. Then we have mixes, and we have ridge mix, and basically what ridge mix is a little bit of these ridges with a little bit of this noise blend together, and that looks like that. So a little bit of the noise, a little bit of the ridges. And we have a blending feature in here, and this blender basically allows us to slide back and forth between more of the noise or more of the ridges. So you can go back and forth between the two of them. And then we have our billow ridge mix, which is interesting because since they're the inverse of each other, we get some interesting kind of results out of that. They kind of start to cancel each other out, so maybe you want more billows or more ridges, and you can play with that as well. So these are different kinds of ways that the fractal will distort the surface, and you can play with those guys to see what happens. The billows, just to quickly mention, what it's particularly useful for is for mounds. If you want, you know, ravines and little mounds of hills and stuff like that, you know, the Scottish hilltops or something like that. This is kind of the one to use in order to get that kind of effect out of it. So you can use that along with something like, you know, the ridge smoothness, which will smooth out, it kind of blurs out the ridges, creating kind of little roads and tracts and stuff like that in there, so you can create a smoother kind of ravine aspect. So a little bit of ridge smoothness in the billows will give you that result. So let's go back to ridges and back to full ridge sharpness. There we go. And let's start playing with a few other features. So let's go back up to the noise variation. So I wrote myself some notes here. So the noise variation deals with essentially the fall off of some features here. And let's just add some roughness to really sort of see what's happening here. So I'll add a bunch of roughness. And I'm going to take this variation strength and I'm going to bring it all the way up. I'm going to see what's going to happen. Those details are still here at the highest points, but at the lower regions they've disappeared, they've vanished. So it's basically a value to say have more detail at the higher peaks but get rid of it at the lower regions. And this does happen in nature. You know, cows are wandering around and grinding down stuff, or sand is ripping through an area or something like that. And it just kind of removes some of those details from that lower region. And the higher regions, since they're not impacted as much, they kind of crack and fall off and become brittle. And you get this more cracks and creases and crevices. So that's what this guy does. Now what you should be careful of is I brought this all the way down to the bottom. Watch what happens. Well, it changed, but where's all the detail that I had in there before? Well, it's left me at a 0.8. That's the bottom of the slider there. If I want all the detail back down in the bottom, I'm going to have to manually set this to 0, and that's going to bring back all that detail down in the bottom region. So if you do want that detail there, you do need it because maybe you're trying to make like a sandy sort of beach or something like that, and you're using this train fractal generator to do some of that for you. Well, that's what you want. You want to be able to go ahead and affect that region in there with all that detail. So just remember that variation strength, if you bring it all the way to the bottom, it's not actually at 0. You have to manually set it at 0. The next feature is something that does affect the overall large features, and it's really not a lot of impact to the roughness. So I'm just going to turn the roughness off here for a moment and show you what happens. So smooth areas, really what it does is kind of imagine these ridges were in here, and we had a sandstorm kind of come in and blow some sand throughout all here. Well, it would fill in these little valleys in here to a certain degree. And that's essentially what it's doing, is it's filling in the valleys. So I'm just going to bring it down to its bottom level here. And we should see these valleys get a little bit deeper. Not much, but a little bit. And if I go ahead and bring it all the way up, sorry, it's the other way around. The valleys got a bit deeper in there. So lowering this basically kind of smooths that out, kind of fills in those regions, kind of equalizes, I guess. But it doesn't just equalize. What I've noticed with this is there's actually a additional fractal that's in here. So it's kind of like it's overlaying another soft kind of noise fractal on top, just lightly. And with that comes this smooth areas altitude. So just imagine this kind of soft cloud fractal that just kind of sits over top of that fills in there. And that's the same idea as like when sand would be coming in, it wouldn't come in just perfectly flat and just sit in there. Wind would be building up ridges of its own little kind of valleys and stuff like that. And so you would get this kind of roughness filling in that area. So that's what this is doing. It fills in the areas with kind of a rougher sort of material, but equalizes everything else. And this amplitude is this smooth areas altitude amplifies that noise. So if I go ahead and change its value, you're going to see a greater level of intensity. So we're getting higher valleys and higher peaks and lower valleys out of this, while maintaining the same general shape of what's going on here. So it's kind of distorting that overall shape a bit more, giving us more overall variation. So I bring that the other way around. It's going to try and flatten all that out. So kind of leave that at sort of 0. Get that back to 0. We'll get back to how we were. So once again, variation strength, it's kind of the fall off for your roughness. Leaves it at the peaks and gets rid of it down in the base. Your smooth areas will fill in these crevice areas with another kind of soft noise, and the smooth area altitude will amplify that noise up and down depending on whether you go up or down on it. So the next bit is a bit of distortion, and it's kind of like someone's gone in and used a smudge brush through it. Let's just go ahead and put it on there. You can see what happens. So just going to throw it on there. And it's just kind of squiggled around. It's kind of like someone's gone into some cake batter and taken a spoon and blah, 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 gone all over there. And all those nice little beautiful peaks that we've made here, they've just been kind of squiggled around. So this will add a lot more variation to the overall pattern that's in here. And this can be a very good thing because it goes ahead and it creates, you know, these different variations in what was initially a very kind of smooth terrain, and now we're getting these different kind of rough angles and whatnot, and it's something that you should use with a little bit of discretion, obviously. I mean, it can be quite intense, and you should also know that it also impacts your roughness in here to a certain degree. Let's add a bit of bump surge just to show you what this guy does. Should see a jump. The whole terrain just jumped upwards and downwards, and that's really all I've gotten out of it. I had a greater deal of distortion on the noise the previous time that I did this, but that's essentially it. So I'm just going to take this distortion down. Seems like sometimes it affects the noise and sometimes it doesn't. And that was probably just a bug the last time I was playing with it. This is the way that I expected it to react the first time anyways. So there we have it. Distortion will affect your overall outside features. We have our origin again here that will allow us to pick a different slice. So if you don't really like what's in here and you've been playing with that stuff, it's a finer tool to go through and just kind of play with this and see that update. So hopefully this has helped you kind of get a better idea of what that terrain fractal generator does, and play with it a whole bunch. Play with the different features to get different kinds of results. You can also go ahead and turn back on things like this to see different kinds of effects. Remember that it zeroes all that out. And most importantly, have lots of fun with it. And that's all for me.